Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Halloween Ends. I think what we have is a very interesting Halloween sequel. Oftentimes people think that means like good because it's interesting. And look, interesting franchise entries are like fun to talk about and interesting to theorize. Like, what were they thinking? The attempt at being different, things like that. Halloween Ends, I think, has the double whammy problem of being a different sequel, which is interesting and thought-provoking and something cinephile dorks like me love to talk about for longer than the movie is good. And at the same time, this was marketed and is called Halloween Ends. Like, this is the final showdown. And none of that works. As an audience, you're being advertised something that this film just sort of isn't for the most part. It's setting you up for something this movie isn't. And even if that thing is more interesting, that's just not, you can get into like, oh, well, audiences should be surprised and stuff. That's just, one, not really how film marketing works. And it's also not, just not a good tone to set, especially with a movie that's kind of straight ahead like slashers are, and this film sort of just doesn't do it as well as it could. At points I thought I liked this movie, but I think overall it's definitely not a good Halloween sequel, although it will go down as one of the more interesting, whether you like that or not. I think that is true. It's not a good Halloween movie, and I don't think what it was trying to do, aside from just being a Halloween movie with its own weird plot line, I don't even think that completely works overall. So this was like a total, utter failure in terms of that, but an interesting one. A guy named Corey Cunningham, who is just asked to babysit this young boy because they can't find anybody else because the parents are going to go to a Halloween party. They go. He has an unfortunate, it is definitely an accident with their son, who falls off like this huge banister from the third story and dies. And it's certainly like Corey is, I guess, an accidental fault, but he didn't willingly or purposely do that. So even though he gets off, he is labeled a child killer for the rest of his life. This was a year after the events of Halloween Kills, what I'm just telling you now. That opens the film in an amazing sequence. I think a horrifying sequence, but one of the better openings for a Halloween sequel. Notice I said sequel I've ever seen. And then it opens, and it's 4 years since the events of Halloween Kills, or since they've seen Michael Myers. And it seems like everyone in the town hates him. He has a pretty horrible life. Before he was going to go to engineering school, now he's just a mechanic for his dad's garage, which is just nice that you can just fall back into a career that probably pays you decent. But he starts falling in love with Andi Matichak, who plays Laurie Strode's granddaughter. And Laurie Strode, you see, has evolved and is writing a book and is trying to move on with her life. And Haddonfield sort of is, even though it really isn't because of the trauma. And Andi Matichak starts falling in love with Corey. And as that is happening, Corey's life is spiraling out of control. And he sort of, I guess this is spoilers, but I don't think that much, becomes sort of a killer and is sort of using Michael Myers as he finds Michael Myers in a tunnel. This is all real, by the way, in like a sewage tunnel after he gets pushed off an overpass. Corey has like the worst life ever, except for dating Andi Matichak and having a nice relationship. That seems to be working out for him. But everything else is pretty horrific. That it kind of invalidates that any goodwill you'd have on your soul. And he basically gets to start becoming the next kind of slasher while also having Michael Myers with him. And at the same time, Michael Myers is going off on his last kind of haunt as kind of with his own protege, I guess. If this was not a Halloween film, it was more focused on Corey and how he's using this old slasher, and it could be like the idea of an old slasher from the 80s and not have a Michael Myers or a Jason in it and just be a random one, and it was more about Corey, I would find this movie very intriguing. And I think if someone had pitched me this idea, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. And you're like, oh, it's a Halloween film. And you're like, oh, okay. I mean, I kind of got a Michael Myers vibe from it, so I get that you'd want to do that. And you're like, oh, it's also the last one that finishes the Laurie Strode story. Now, I don't know if Jamie Lee Curtis will come back. This is the end of Blumhouse having the rights. It goes back to the family who's had it for years and years, and someone else can make another one, but this is the last one with specifically Blumhouse and David Gordon Green and all them. Presumably Jamie Lee Curtis. I'm not trying to saying she'll invalidate this. I don't think this is Logan or anything like that, although I guess that doesn't mean anything. But it really could have been something interesting, and I think that's the thing that bugs me. Is the thing that was more interesting was Corey's character, and that is surprising because when I didn't know who this character was before I started it, and the opening intrigued me and shocked me, and I was like, this is a disturbing horror film and an interesting horror film about this town, and I thought was way better at what it was doing than Kills was, because Kills maybe works better as a Halloween movie but is pretty boring. And you could say, like, look, in our franchise culture, reboot culture, whatever time we're in or however you want to call it, a lot of these films, my complaint, even though it shouldn't be a complaint in a lot of ways, was like, how come we always get the sequel that's like maybe the best of a sequel of sequels that aren't great. You know, Halloween isn't a great franchise. It's a great movie by John Carpenter, and then like a really uneven franchise. And when you saw 2018, I think it's 2018, you went, oh yeah, okay, cool, I'm totally with this. Kills was like not as good, but it was like the idea that like, oh, okay, this like Force Awakens, you're like, okay, I don't think this is maybe as good as Return of the Jedi, and you're like, I'm comfortable with that. I guess you kind of settle for its quality, even if it is pretty good. And I think none of them, other than Last Jedi or anything, really try to push the buttons and mess with that and things like that. And I think Halloween Ends does that. But the problem is you want an end point to the Halloween and this trilogy, and it just not doing that. It disregards it. And I like that about it. But like, you really had to go full tilt, because it does feel like towards the end they go, okay, well, we have to have this like Michael Myers, Laurie Strode confrontation, and it just doesn't fit in the plot at all. It really doesn't work the way they do it. And I think you could have had that naturally within it, or you could have had two generations. Like one, she's like, maybe I'm actually sort of attracted to the new killer, and what I used to fear Michael Myers attracts me with her granddaughter, which they do not get into, which is like an easy thing to read into, by the way. I would think, just because of that relationship, but they don't, and it feels like there's a lot of ripe psychological ground in this that would be a lot of fun. It's like the whole idea of like the generations works into the 1978 film, because in the 1978 film you had the idea that, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis is the daughter of Janet Leigh, and like they're doing the same thing in this updated version. And you could totally have her granddaughter now doing a completely separate thing, which is surprising, her falling in love with the killer and stuff like that, which I thought could have been really thought-provoking and provocative and stuff. But unfortunately, it kind of just doesn't want to go. It's definitely strange. It's definitely weird. And I think it'll go down not as much as Halloween 3. It's unfortunately for Halloween Ends, Halloween 3 exists, but I do think in this franchise it will go down in the more positive end of, they made this weird Halloween sequel, but and we probably should have known David Gordon Green was going to do that, because I think he references Halloween 3 a couple times in his other films. I know he did in 2018. I definitely think this could have been one of the more interesting, if it had nailed a landing, like concretely more interesting Halloween sequels. And it kind of is, but it just feels like a huge missed opportunity in a lot of ways. And I really hate that, because there's parts I really liked about it, and I thought it was like playing in waters that you wanted them to go in deeper. It's like, you know, did you need to sell the Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Myers confrontation? Did you need to even have it? I don't think you did necessarily in the film I saw, but you did because you had to wrap this up. So it's like it was a bad marriage of the two. They should have just done a Michael Myers coming back thing, or just done this thing with Corey and like his horrific life and how he's like, society kind of, I guess, broke him down to be a killer, sort of like a Joker slasher sort of thing, I guess. I like the performance by Rowan Campbell. I thought I actually quite liked him. in this. I do think the character sometimes, they don't get into it as much. I liked Andy Malachek, who I've liked in the other ones, but I think I liked her performance in this was a lot more interesting. She also don't get into, like, they're constantly talking about, like, let's burn the town down, and you're like, when he does, she's like, oh shit, I thought it was like a metaphor or something. like I don't know. I get that she probably didn't actually mean it, but like it was interesting. She didn't. I think there could have been a lot more there for her. That's in the writing, not in her. I thought she performed it very well, and she kind of she almost gives you the idea that there's something else going on with her than the material does, which I think is smart as an actress. Jamie Lee Curtis is always really great. I don't think this is. She kind of gets it. This is a weird movie, clearly, and I like that about her. I think I like that about all the old Carpenter regulars. They kind of, like, at the heart in their performances, you can tell, like, I know what this is. And, like, much like what Kurt Russell continues to be good at and was good at with John Carpenter, you can tell she gets that this is strange and this doesn't work, but she's going to, like, be the kind of spooky presence going on throughout it. I also really like the John Carpenter score with his son and other guy. And, this is an interesting... I really think the last act, where it doesn't really understand how to conclude or what it's ultimately saying, hurts us so much. And it's like, yeah, sure, it's doing Friday the 13th Part 5 and stuff, but like, and I think better than that. But I think the whole idea of, like, this, like, passing on the Michael Myers thing has been done, like, in the end of Part 4, in Friday the 13th Part 5. Like, there's so many times people try to do this, and, like, they never do it. And I get that this is maybe the most fascinating, but it doesn't do it because this plot couldn't have made it. I feel like it could have if they gave it that meaning, and they were so close. And I guess maybe that's what I'm thinking of. It's like they were so close to having this, like, passing of the torch thing, which is interesting because when you think of passing of the torch, usually you think it's the good guys, and they haven't really done that with the slasher with the bad guys. So maybe that's what's so intriguing. The idea of that is so fascinating, and I wish it had worked. Unfortunately, overall, it didn't. So, oh well. I think Halloween Ends kind of ends on a whimper, on a, oh, I guess we didn't really need that many more of these, as Halloween sequels usually do. But I guess everyone kind of, I kept reading reviews, it seems like everyone's perfect Halloween film is either 2018 or Halloween 4, when it's not the original Halloween. But, oh well, I like that David Gordon Green tried to make such a strange film, but I'm disappointed that it didn't end up really meaning much other than, like, an interesting attempt that just goes into what I guess you wanted from a Halloween film. It just, he didn't want to give it to you till a very awkward ending. So if you have seen Halloween Ends and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.